The loneliness of the Blackwood forest was a familiar ache in Finian's chest, a constant companion that clung to him like the damp moss to the ancient oaks. For 5 years, this sprawling, untamed wilderness had been his only home, his sanctuary, and his prison. As an Omega cast out and left for dead after the brutal annihilation of his pack, survival was a daily grinding battle. He was a ghost, a whisper of a man, with hair the color of sun-bleached straw and eyes a startling, gentle amber that seemed to hold all the sorrow of his forsaken world. His frame was lean, almost gaunt, a testament to missed meals and cold nights, but beneath the worn leather tunic a wiry strength remained, honed by the relentless demands of the wild. His shelter was a modest affair, a shallow cave tucked behind a curtain of ivy on a rocky hillside, a place no one would ever look twice at. Inside, a collection of scavenged blankets, threadbare but clean, formed a nest against the cold stone. A small, carefully constructed fire pit sat in the center, its ashes cold from the morning's small fire. Finian, or Finn as he called himself in the quiet of his own mind, was meticulous. His small space was orderly, a rebellion against the chaos that had defined his life. He was a creature of habit and soft-heartedness, often leaving a portion of his trapped rabbits or foraged berries for the smaller critters of the woods, his only real community. This evening, the air was heavy with the promise of rain, the scent of damp earth and pine filling his lungs. Finn moved with a quiet grace through the undergrowth, his bare feet making no sound on the fallen leaves as he checked his snares. It was a meager hunt. 1 rabbit, barely enough for a single meal. A familiar pang of self-pity pricked at him. Alphas and betas were built for the hunt, for the kill. He was built for nurture, for peace, a role that had no place in a world without a pack to care for. He was an anomaly, a failure. As he knelt to reset a snare, a new scent cut through the familiar smells of the forest. It was sharp and metallic, blood, and something else beneath it, a smell of pure, unadulterated terror. It was faint, carried on the shifting currents of the wind, but his Omega senses, always heightened, latched onto it immediately. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to retreat to the safety of his cave and block the entrance. Rogues, he was certain. Their stench was unmistakable, a foul mix of desperation and malice. A fight was not his to have, and Omega would be torn to shreds in seconds. He stayed crouched, his body frozen, listening. Then it came, a sound that pierced the evening calm and lanced straight through his heart. A scream. It was female, choked with fear and desperation. It wasn't the cry of a predator or the shriek of an animal. It was human. It was the sound of someone fighting for their life. Finn's carefully constructed walls of self-preservation began to crumble. He squeezed his eyes shut. It is not your concern, the pragmatic part of his brain hissed. You are weak. You are alone. You will only get yourself killed. But then the scream came again, weaker this time, followed by the guttural laughter of cruel men. That sound, that awful, triumphant sound, ignited something within him. It was the same sound he had heard the night his pack fell, the night his family was slaughtered while he hid, small and terrified. He had survived, but the guilt had gnawed at him ever since. He could not hide again. He could not live with himself if he let that sound go unanswered. His soft heart, the very thing that made him a poor hunter and a target for bullies in his old life, was also the source of an unyielding compassion. It was a curse, but it was also all he had left. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Finian pushed himself to his feet. The choice was made. He let the rabbit fall from his hand and began to run, not away from the danger, but directly towards it. As he ran, his body flowed and shifted, bones elongating, fur sprouting. In his place was a wolf, smaller than most, with a coat of ethereal, shimmering silver that seemed to soak in the dying light of the day. He was no fighter, but he was fast, and he knew the woods better than the back of his own hand. Tonight, that would have to be enough.
Chapter 2: The Silver Ghost and the Raven-Haired Girl. The stench of the rogues grew stronger as Finn raced through the trees, a silent silver blur against the deepening shadows. He burst into a small, mossy clearing and skidded to a halt, his paws sinking into the soft earth. The scene before him was worse than he had imagined. 3 large, brutish werewolves in their human forms circled a young woman. They were the very picture of depravity, unwashed, scarred, with eyes that gleamed with a predatory hunger that had nothing to do with food. But it was the girl who held his attention. She was backed against a thick, ancient rowan tree, her clothes torn and smeared with dirt. Long, raven-black hair fell in a tangled mess around her face, but even in her terror, she was defiant. Her chin was lifted, and her eyes, a brilliant, blazing emerald green, sparked with untamed fire. In her hand, she clutched a thick, broken branch, holding it like a sword against the circling beasts. She was terrified, her scent was a storm of fear in the air, but she was not broken. Finn's heart clenched. He was small, an omega against 3 brutes who looked like they could snap him in two without a second thought. His fear was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. But the sight of her defiance, the sheer injustice of the scene, overrode everything. He could not fight them with strength, but he did not have to. Instead of a battle cry, he offered silence. He melted back into the undergrowth, his silver coat making him nearly invisible in the twilight. He circled the clearing, as swift and silent as a phantom. He snapped a dry twig to his left. The rogues' heads whipped in that direction, their attention momentarily diverted. That was all he needed. He became a ghost. A flash of silver fur nipped at the heel of the largest rogue, who spun around with a roar of fury, swatting at empty air. While the brute was distracted, Finn darted to the other side of the clearing, shouldering a precariously balanced pile of rocks at the base of a small incline, sending them clattering down. The noise was jarring, unnatural. The rogues were on edge, their eyes darting into the woods, searching for the source of their torment. They were hunters, but now they were being hunted, toyed with by an unseen force. What was that? One of them snarled, his eyes wide. "Show yourself, coward." Another bellowed, his voice echoing through the trees. The girl used their confusion to her advantage. She swung her branch, catching one of the men squarely across the face. He howled in pain and rage, blood pouring from his nose. His eyes narrowed on her, all thoughts of the forest phantom gone. He lunged. A surge of pure, primal protectiveness, so powerful it shocked him, flooded Finn's senses. All caution abandoned him. He shot out from the cover of the ferns, a silver streak of moonlight and fury. He didn't aim for a killing blow, he knew he couldn't manage one. Instead, he launched himself at the lunging rogue, sinking his teeth deep into the fleshy part of the man's extended arm. The rogue screamed, a high-pitched sound of shock and agony, and recoiled, shaking his arm violently to dislodge the surprisingly strong wolf. The attack had been so sudden, so unexpected, that it broke their momentum entirely. The other 2 stared, finally getting a clear look at their tormentor. They saw not a fearsome alpha, but a small, silver omega wolf. Their confusion turned to contemptuous laughter. "It's an omega. A pathetic stray." But their laughter was strained. This was no cowering, submissive omega. This one was clever, fast, and had just drawn blood. The element of surprise was gone, but Finn had sown enough chaos and frustration. They were unnerved. The easy sport they had anticipated had turned into a painful and humiliating ordeal. The leader, clutching his bleeding arm, glared first at the defiant girl, then into the dark woods where the silver wolf had once again vanished. "He's not worth it," the leader growled, spitting blood onto the ground. "Let's go. But we'll find you again, little stray. And we'll finish this." With one last hateful glance, the 3 rogues shifted into their mangy wolf forms and crashed back into the forest, their footsteps fading into the distance. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the sound of ragged breathing. Finn, hidden in the shadows of a large fern, felt the adrenaline slowly drain away, leaving him trembling and exhausted. He waited a long moment before allowing his body to shift back to its human form. He leaned against a tree, his own cuts and bruises stinging, and looked out at the girl. She stood frozen, her makeshift club hanging loosely in her hand. Her chest was heaving, and as he watched, her fiery gaze softened, her fear finally giving way to awe, relief, and a dawning, hesitant gratitude as she stared at the spot where the silver ghost had saved her. Chapter 3: A Shelter from the Storm. The silence that followed the rogue's retreat was thick and heavy. Finn remained half-hidden in the shadows, his heart still hammering against his ribs. The girl, Serafina, though he did not yet know her name, slowly lowered the branch, her knuckles white. Her gaze swept the clearing, searching for her mysterious savior. Finn took a hesitant step forward, breaking a twig underfoot. Her head snapped in his direction, her emerald eyes wide with a fresh wave of fear. He immediately froze, raising his hands in a slow, placating gesture. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice soft, raspy from disuse. She stared at him, taking in his tattered clothes, the dirt smudges on his face, and the undeniable kindness in his amber eyes. She saw the lines of exhaustion and hunger etched around his mouth, but saw nothing of the malice that had been in the eyes of her attackers. He was the Silver Wolf. The realization dawned on her, and the fear in her eyes was replaced by a profound sense of wonder. As he moved fully into the clearing's fading light, he saw her flinch and try to put weight on her foot, her face twisting in pain. "You're hurt," he stated gently. He closed the distance between them slowly, as if approaching a frightened deer. When he was close enough, he knelt and looked at her ankle, which was already beginning to swell. "It looks twisted." His touch was surprisingly delicate as his fingers brushed against her skin, sending an unexpected jolt of warmth through her. His nurturing instincts, the core of his Omega nature, were now in full control. "My shelter is nearby. It's warm and dry. I can help you there." Serafina hesitated for only a moment. This gentle stranger had saved her life. She had been running from a gilded cage, only to fall into a den of wolves, and it was this homeless man, this Omega, who had been her unlikely guardian angel. She gave a small, trusting nod. Leaning on him for support, they made their way through the darkening woods. The journey was slow, but Finn was patient, his arm a steady presence around her waist. He led her to a part of the forest she would never have found, behind a shimmering waterfall that cascaded over a rock face. Pushing aside a curtain of thick vines, he revealed the entrance to his cave. To Serafina, who had grown up in the sprawling stone castle of the Lycan King, the cave should have felt primitive and terrifying. But as Finn coaxed a small fire to life in the central pit, the space was transformed. The flickering flames danced across the stone walls, casting a warm orange glow over the humble interior. It was small, but it was safe. It was a haven. The warmth seeped into her chilled bones, and for the first time in days, she felt a profound sense of peace. Without a word, Finn set about tending to her injuries. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a handful of broad, green leaves and a small wooden bowl of water. He crushed the leaves into a paste, the faint, clean scent of herbs filling the air. "This will help with the swelling and keep it from getting infected," he explained softly. He gently cleaned the cuts on her arms before carefully applying the cool, soothing poultice to her ankle, his movements deft and sure. As he wrapped her ankle with strips of clean cloth he had scavenged, their fingers brushed again, and the quiet intimacy of the moment hung between them. "My name is Sera," she whispered, breaking the silence. "Finian," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Finn." He offered her the last of his water in a worn tin cup and then set about roasting the rabbit he had dropped earlier but circled back to retrieve. He insisted she take the largest portion. As they ate, he learned a carefully edited version of her story. She was an orphan, she said, from a village on the other side of the woods that had been raided. She was all alone. It was a lie, but it was coated with the genuine trauma of her recent experience. Finn heard the pain in her voice and saw the shadows in her eyes, and his heart went out to her. He didn't press for details, sensing her fragility. He understood what it meant to lose everything and be alone. As the fire crackled and the waterfall outside provided a soothing, constant shush, Serafina's eyelids grew heavy. Finn laid out his warmest, softest blanket for her, a tattered but cherished wool he had found years ago. She lay down, her body aching but her spirit settling. As she drifted into the first truly restful sleep she'd had in a week, her last waking sight was of Finn, sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. There was a profound loneliness in his posture, a deep-seated sadness in his beautiful, gentle eyes. In that moment, she felt an inexplicable, powerful pull towards this kind, broken man who had been a ghost, a wolf and a savior, all in one night. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Heart. Serafina woke to the soft, melodic sound of birdsong and the earthy scent of the cave. Sunlight, filtered through the waterfall's spray, cast shimmering, dancing patterns on the stone ceiling. For a moment, she was disoriented, the plush canopy of her bedchamber at the royal palace a world away. Then, the memory of the rogues, of the silver wolf and the gentle man, rushed back. She sat up, wincing as she tested her ankle. The swelling had gone down, and the throbbing pain had been replaced by a dull ache. The herbal poultice had worked wonders. Finn was already awake, his meager belongings neatly organized. He was tending to the fire, his movements economical and filled with a quiet grace that she found captivating. He turned as he sensed her stirring, a small, shy smile touching his lips. "Good morning," he said. "How is your ankle?" "Much better," she admitted, surprised. "Thank you. That salve you made is incredible." "My mother taught me about herbs," he said, the words tinged with a distant sadness. It was clear her ankle was still too weak for travel, a fact that brought Serafina a secret sense of relief. The thought of leaving the strange safety of this cave and its kind inhabitant was a daunting one. They spent the day in a slow, comfortable orbit around each other. As Finn went about his daily chores, a deep-seated curiosity prompted Sera to ask questions. She wanted to know everything about him, about this life he lived. As he showed her how to set a simple snare, his hands brushing hers as he guided her, he found himself opening up in a way he hadn't in years. He spoke of the forest as if it were a living entity, of its moods and secrets. He talked about his loneliness, not in a plea for pity, but as a simple statement of fact, a long, cold winter he had endured. He was starved for simple conversation, for a connection that went beyond the skittish trust of a fox or a field mouse. Sera listened, truly listened, her emerald eyes full of a compassion he had never been shown before. In turn, she spoke of her own feelings of isolation, carefully veiling the truth of her life in metaphor. She spoke of feeling trapped in a big, busy house, where everyone saw her as a symbol, not a person. She confessed her desire for freedom, for the chance to make her own choices, to be seen for who she was on the inside. Finn, who knew all too well what it was like to be judged and defined by his station, found a startling and profound common ground with this mysterious orphan girl. Later that afternoon, to pass the time, she began to tidy the small cave, folding his blankets with a practiced neatness that seemed at odds with her story of being a simple villager. Finn watched her, a lump forming in his throat. No one had ever shown him such simple, domestic kindness. It was a gesture of a packmate, of family. The air between them grew thick with unspoken feelings. A stolen glance across the fire, the way his fingers lingered when he handed her a cup of raspberry leaf tea, the soft laughter they shared when a squirrel chided them from a nearby branch, it was all weaving a delicate, invisible thread between their two lonely hearts. Sera found herself looking at him differently. She saw past the matted hair and the worn clothes to the inherent nobility in his features, the strength in his wiry frame, and the deep, unwavering kindness in his soul. A fierce, protective feeling began to bloom in her chest, a startling desire to shield him from the world that had so clearly hurt him. He had been her rescuer, but she now felt an overwhelming urge to be his. For Finn, the feelings were even more potent and terrifying. He was falling for her. It was a dangerous, impossible thought. He was an outcast, a homeless omega with nothing to offer. She was beautiful and full of a fiery spirit that deserved a better life than one spent in a cave at the edge of the world. Yet, he couldn't stop himself from imagining it. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays through the waterfall, he looked at her as she smiled at something he said, and he felt a joy so sharp and pure it was almost painful. He was completely and utterly captivated, and he was terrified of the moment she would be well enough to walk away and leave him alone in the silence once more. Chapter 5. The Shadow of the Crown. 3 days passed in a haze of quiet domesticity. The cave behind the waterfall had transformed from a simple shelter into a shared home, filled with the low murmur of conversation and the soft echo of laughter. Sera's ankle was nearly healed, and a silent, unspoken tension grew with her returning strength. Neither of them wanted to acknowledge the inevitable moment of her departure. The bond between them had deepened into something fragile and precious, a beautiful, impossible thing that both were afraid to name. One afternoon, Finn returned from his trapline, 2 plump rabbits slung over his shoulder. He pushed aside the vine-covered entrance to the cave and stopped dead in his tracks. The sight that greeted him stole the air from his lungs. Sera had spent the afternoon gathering wildflowers from the small, sun-dappled meadow nearby. With surprising skill, she had woven the columbine, foxglove, and wild daisies into a small, delicate crown. She had placed it atop her head, and as she looked up at his arrival, a playful smile gracing her lips, she looked for all the world like a forest queen. The simple, innocent gesture struck him with the force of a physical blow. Even in her ragged clothes, with a smudge of dirt on her cheek, an innate and effortless regality shone from her. It was in her posture, the graceful line of her neck, the commanding yet gentle light in her emerald eyes. His heart ached with a love so profound it felt like a wound. She was magnificent, and she was so far beyond his reach it was laughable. He was a creature of the shadows, and she was a sunbeam that had accidentally wandered into his darkness. He forced a smile, hiding the turmoil inside him, and was about to compliment her creation when a scent on the wind made his blood run cold. He had been so caught up in his emotions that he hadn't been paying proper attention. But it was there now, unmistakable and terrifyingly close. It was the scent of power, of discipline, of old-world authority. It was the scent of the royal pack. Legends and whispers were all Finn knew of them. They were the Lycan King Alistair's elite guard, a force of the most powerful, highly trained alphas in the kingdom. Their scent was laced with the faint, unique trace of the royal bloodline they swore to protect. He had never smelled it before in his life, yet he knew it instinctively. His mind raced, piecing together the terrifying puzzle. Royal guards didn't wander into the Blackwood Forest for a casual hunt. They were searching for someone important. His gaze snapped to Sera, her playful smile faltering as she saw the sheer panic on his face. The way she had tidied the cave, her confident bearing, her carefully vague story. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "They're looking for you," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He dropped the rabbits and rushed back to the cave entrance, peering out through the vines. "There are royal guards nearby," he said, his back still to her. "I can smell them. Alphas. Many of them." He turned to face her, his amber eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. This was no orphan girl from a pillaged village. This was something else entirely. "Sera, who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. Seraphina's face had gone deathly pale. The playful light in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by the very fear he had seen the day he met her. The game was over. Her secret, which had started as a means of survival, had become a wall between them. She knew she had to tell him the truth, the whole, impossible truth. She owed him that much. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "Finian, my name. It's not just Sera." She opened her mouth to confess, to tell him that she was Seraphina, the runaway princess, daughter of the very king whose men were now closing in on them. But before the words could leave her lips, a sound ripped through the forest, shattering the peace of their sanctuary. It was a roar, deep and powerful, an alpha command that vibrated in the very bones of the earth. It was a sound of absolute authority. And it was terrifyingly close. They were no longer alone. The shadow of the crown had found them. Chapter 6: The Alpha's Command. The Alpha's roar was a physical force, a wave of pure dominance that slammed into Finn and sent him staggering back. It was a command that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct, screaming submit, yield, obey. Every omega impulse in his body wanted to drop to the ground, to expose his throat and show fealty. It took every ounce of his newfound resolve, born from his feelings for Sera, to remain standing, though his body trembled violently. Through the waterfall's shimmering curtain, a figure emerged, followed by 4 others. They were warriors, clad in gleaming silver armor etched with the royal crest of a snarling wolf's head. But it was the man in the lead who commanded all attention. He was the source of the roar. Tall and powerfully built, with hair the color of polished obsidian and eyes a piercing, glacial silver, he was the very picture of an alpha in his prime. A long, jagged scar ran down his left temple, a testament to a life of battle. This was Kale, captain of the royal guard, and the most powerful alpha in the kingdom next to the king himself. His cold eyes swept the cave, cataloguing its meager contents with a disdainful sneer before they landed on Serafina. The hardness in his expression flickered, replaced by a possessive fury. "Serafina," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Your little adventure is over." Finn watched in stunned silence as the captain strode forward, his gaze finally falling on Finn as if noticing a piece of dirt on the floor for the first time. Kale's lip curled in contempt. "And what is this? Did you run away to play house with a filthy Omega stray?" The insult, delivered with such casual cruelty, struck Finn harder than a physical blow. He saw Sera flinch, her face pale with a mixture of fear and anger. "Leave him alone, Kale," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "He saved my life." Kale let out a short, harsh laugh. "This? Saved you? From what? A harsh breeze. Your recklessness could have cost us everything. The king is furious." He grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "We are leaving. Now." But Serafina stood her ground, pulling her arm from his grasp. Her eyes, those brilliant emeralds that had so captivated Finn, flashed with royal fire. "I said, leave him alone." It was then that Finn understood everything. The regality, the carefully worded stories, the royal guard. Serafina. A princess. The daughter of the Lycan King. The chasm between their worlds wasn't just wide, it was a gaping, impossible canyon. He was a homeless nobody, and she was royalty, betrothed to the terrifying alpha who now stood before him. A wave of despair washed over Finn, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. Yet, as Kale advanced on Sera again, something inside Finn snapped. He moved without thinking, placing himself between the alpha and the princess. It was a suicidal, foolish gesture. An Omega, challenging an alpha captain. Kale stopped, his silver eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. A low, menacing growl rumbled in his chest. "You have 10 seconds to get out of my sight before I tear you limb from limb, stray." "Don't you touch him," Serafina cried, her voice laced with panic. Finn's heart hammered against his ribs, but he held the alpha's gaze. He had nothing. No power, no status, no strength. But he had this one pure, impossible thing in his heart. "She doesn't want to go with you," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried in the tense silence of the cave. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Kale's shock at the sheer audacity of the Omega was palpable. He was about to unleash his fury, to make good on his threat, when Serafina made her choice. She knew Kale would kill Finn without a second thought and feel utterly justified in doing so. She could not let that happen. "All right," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll go. Just, don't hurt him. Please." Kale smirked, a cruel, triumphant expression. He gave Finn one last dismissive shove that sent him stumbling backward. As the guards escorted her out, Serafina turned her head, her eyes locking with Finn's. The look she gave him was filled with apology, anguish, and a silent, desperate promise. "This isn't over." Then she was gone, and the wildflower crown she had made, which had fallen to the floor in the commotion, was unceremoniously crushed under Kale's heavy leather boot as he followed her out into the world that was hers, and would never be Finn's. The cave was silent again, but now the silence was a suffocating, heartbreaking void. Chapter 7, A Gilded Cage. The journey back to the royal citadel of Silvermoon was a blur of misery for Serafina. She was placed on a fine, black stallion and surrounded by the emotionless silver-clad guards, a prisoner in all but name. Kale rode beside her, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, occasionally barking orders or making pointed remarks about her childish rebellion. She ignored him, her thoughts a tumultuous storm. The warmth of the cave, the safety she had felt with Finn, his gentle touch and soft-spoken kindness, it all felt like a dream she had been cruelly woken from. The citadel was exactly as she remembered it, a breathtaking and intimidating fortress of white stone and gleaming silver towers that pierced the sky. To the kingdom, it was a symbol of strength and prosperity. To Serafina, it was the most beautiful prison in the world. Servants bowed as she was swept through the grand halls, their faces carefully neutral, though she could feel their curious stares. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax, expensive perfumes, and stifling formality. It was a world away from the clean, earthy smell of the forest and Finn's cave. She was taken directly to the throne room. Her father, King Alistair, sat upon the massive obsidian throne, his presence filling the cavernous chamber. He was a formidable man, his hair and beard streaked with grey, but his body still held the immense power of the Lycan King. His eyes, a deeper, harder shade of emerald than her own, were narrowed in a thunderous expression of disapproval. "Serafina," his voice boomed, echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. "Explain yourself." "I needed to get away," she said, lifting her chin, her voice refusing to tremble. "I needed to breathe." "Breathe?" he roared, rising from the throne. "You are the future of this kingdom. Your marriage to Lord Kale will unite the two most powerful bloodlines, securing our borders and ensuring our prosperity for generations. And you throw that away to run off into the woods like a commoner? You were nearly killed. Did you think of your duty? Of your people?" "I think of it every day," she retorted, her own anger rising. "My entire life is a performance of duty. I am a symbol, a bargaining chip. I wanted, for 1 week, to be a person. You were found in the filth of a stray Omega's den." Kale interjected, his voice dripping with venom. "That is the person you wish to be." The injustice of his words made her see red. "That stray Omega showed me more kindness and courage than I have ever known within these cold walls. He saved me from rogues while your patrols were nowhere to be seen." King Alistair's jaw tightened. "Enough. The matter is settled. You will remain within the palace grounds under constant guard until the wedding. You have embarrassed this family and endangered the kingdom. You will reflect on your duties and prepare to fulfill them." He waved a dismissive hand. "Take her to her chambers." As the guards led her away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her rooms were the pinnacle of luxury, a 4-poster bed draped in silk, a balcony overlooking the royal gardens, a wardrobe filled with exquisite gowns. It was a gilded cage, and the bars had never felt colder or harder. She walked to her balcony, staring out at the perfectly manicured landscape. She thought of the wild, untamed beauty of the Blackwood forest. She thought of a humble cave behind a waterfall. And most of all, she thought of a gentle man with sad amber eyes, the only person who had ever seen her not as a princess, but simply as Sera. A single tear traced a path down her cheek as she mourned the loss of a freedom she had only just discovered. Chapter 8. The Scent of a Memory. The moment Serafina was gone, the life drained out of the small cave. The fire, which had been a source of warmth and companionship, now seemed to mock Finn with its flickering light, illuminating the crushing emptiness of the space. Her scent, a heady mix of wildflowers, rain, and a unique sweetness that was all her own, lingered in the air, a ghostly presence that was both a comfort and a torment. He ran a hand over the soft wool blanket she had slept on, the lingering warmth a painful reminder of what he had lost. He was a fool. An utter and complete fool. How could he have allowed himself to feel anything for her? He, a cast-out, a nothing. And she, a princess, destined to marry a powerful, cruel alpha. The memory of Kale's sneer, the contempt in his eyes as he'd called him a filthy Omega stray, replayed in Finn's mind on a loop. The words were a brand, searing into the old wounds of his past, reminding him of his place in the world. He was weak, powerless, and utterly insignificant. He had tried to stand up for her, and in the end, he had only been shoved aside like a piece of trash. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He curled up by the cold ashes of the fire, wrapping his arms around himself, and for the first time in years, he wept. He wept for his lost pack, for his solitary existence, and for the beautiful, impossible dream of a life with Serafina that had been born and had died in the space of a few days. He was alone again, but the loneliness was sharper now, more profound, because he had tasted what it was like not to be. He stayed that way for a long time, lost in his grief. But as the moon rose, its pale light filtering through the waterfall, a different feeling began to surface, pushing through the despair. It was the memory of Serafina's eyes as she was led away. There was no pity in them. There was fire, and there was a promise. She hadn't looked at him like he was a pathetic stray. She had looked at him like he was her protector, her equal. He thought of her courage facing the rogues, her defiance against her father and Kale. She was a fighter, trapped in a life she didn't want. And he? What was he? A survivor. He had survived the slaughter of his pack. He had survived 5 years alone in a harsh wilderness. He was not strong like an alpha, but he was resilient. He was clever. He was not nothing. A slow-burning anger began to replace his shame. Anger at Kale for his cruelty. Anger at the king for seeing his daughter as a political pawn. Anger at a world that judged people by their birthright and not by their character. Lying in the darkness, Finn made a decision. He could not go back to his old life. He could not spend his days checking snares and hiding from the world, haunted by the memory of what he'd briefly had. It wasn't enough anymore. He didn't know what he could possibly do. He couldn't fight an army of alphas or storm a royal citadel. But he had to try something. He had to see her again, to know that she was safe, to find out if that promise in her eyes was real. The thought was terrifying. It meant leaving the only home he'd known for 5 years and walking into the heart of the world that had cast him out. It was a fool's errand, a suicidal mission. But as he looked at the crushed petals of the wildflower crown on the cave floor, he knew he had to do it. For the first time in his life, Finian was not running from something. He was running towards it. Chapter 9. The Unseen Enemy. Confined to her opulent quarters, Serafina refused to be a passive prisoner. The initial wave of despair gave way to a cold, calculating anger. She had always been observant, a skill honed by years of navigating the treacherous currents of court politics. Now, she put that skill to use. She listened. She watched. She became a ghost within her own home. She noted the way certain guards avoided her gaze, the hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when she entered a room. She pieced together fragments of gossip from servants, whispers of unease in the lower city, and rumors of rogue packs growing bolder and more organized near the borders. Her father and Kale dismissed it all as the usual rabble, but Serafina sensed a pattern, a hidden thread connecting the disparate events. Her betrothed, Kale, visited her daily, bringing her gifts of jewelry and silk, his attempts at courtship as cold and hard as his silver eyes. He spoke of their future, of the power they would wield together, of the sons she would bear him. He saw her as a beautiful vessel for his legacy. During one of his visits, while he boasted of a recent raid he had led against a rogue encampment, he let something slip. "We took down their leader," he said with a proud smirk. "A brute named Fangs. He was getting ambitious. Thought he could carve out his own territory right under our noses." The name snagged in Serafina's memory. Fangs. That was the name one of the rogues in the woods had called their leader, the one Finn had injured. They hadn't been random drifters. They were part of an organized group. And they had been deep inside the Blackwood, far from the borders. Too deep for a simple territorial dispute. The horrifying truth began to dawn on her. The attack in the woods hadn't been a chance encounter. It had been an ambush. They had been waiting for her. Her flight from the palace hadn't led her into danger. It had inadvertently allowed her to escape a carefully laid trap. Someone had known her route. Someone with access to the palace's inner workings had wanted her kidnapped or killed. Her suspicion immediately fell on Lord Valerius, her father's chief advisor and Kale's primary rival for power in the court. He was a cunning, ambitious alpha from an old bloodline who had always seen her marriage to Kale as a threat to his own influence. He was clever enough and ruthless enough to orchestrate such a plot, using rogue packs as his pawns to destabilize the kingdom and halt the Union. This new knowledge shifted everything. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom anymore, she was fighting for the stability of the kingdom itself. And she was surrounded by enemies masquerading as allies. She couldn't go to her father, who was too blinded by tradition and his trust in his counsel. She certainly couldn't trust Kale, whose own ambition was a palpable force. For all she knew, he could be involved himself, seeking to emerge as the hero who rescued her and consolidated his power. She was truly alone, trapped in a nest of vipers. Her thoughts flew once again to Finn. He was the only person she had met in years whom she could trust without question. He had no hidden agenda, no desire for power. He had simply seen someone in trouble and helped. The memory of his quiet strength, his gentle kindness, was a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness of her life. She had to find a way to warn him. The rogues might go back to the woods looking for the stray who had thwarted their plans. His life was in danger because of her. The urgency to escape her gilded cage was no longer just about her own desires. It was about protecting the homeless Omega who had saved her life and, in doing so, had captured her heart. Chapter 10. A Journey to the Heart of the Kingdom. Finn spent one last night in the cave, gathering his meager possessions, a flint and steel, a small knife, and the tattered wool blanket Seraphina had used. He took one last look at the place that had been his sanctuary for so long, and then, with the first light of dawn, he slipped out from behind the waterfall and began his journey. The world outside the familiar borders of his territory in the Blackwood was a dangerous and unforgiving place for a lone Omega. Every scent was a potential threat, every snapped twig a sign of danger. His instincts, honed by years of solitary survival, were on high alert. He moved like a wraith, sticking to the shadows, his light frame and silent steps allowing him to pass through the undergrowth unheard and unseen. He traveled for days, sleeping in hollow logs or high in the branches of ancient trees, and eating whatever he could forage or catch in small, simple snares. He skirted the territories of established packs, the scent markers of their alpha leaders a clear warning to stay away. He crossed paths with a patrol of royal guards once, their silver armor glinting in the sun. He froze, melting into a thicket of thorns and holding his breath until they passed, their boisterous laughter and talk of the runaway princess grating on his nerves. Their casual disdain for her ordeal only fueled the fire of his determination. On the fifth day, exhausted and hungry, he stumbled upon a small hidden stream. As he knelt to drink, another scent reached him, old, female, and different. Not threatening. He looked up to see an elderly she-wolf watching him from the other side of the stream. She was an Omega, like him, her fur gray and her body stooped with age, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. "You are a long way from home, little one," she said, her voice a soft rasp. Finn was wary, but her scent was peaceful. He simply nodded. "You travel towards the city of Silvermoon," she stated, not as a question. "It is a dangerous place for our kind. They value strength and power above all. Gentleness is seen as a weakness to be exploited." She looked him over, her gaze lingering on the resolute set of his jaw. "But you have a fire in your heart. I have not seen such a look in an Omega's eyes for many years." She offered him a piece of dried meat from a pouch at her side. "You will need your strength for the path ahead. Be careful who you trust. The prettiest flowers in the king's garden often have the sharpest thorns." He accepted her gift with a grateful nod, and the old Omega disappeared back into the woods as silently as she had appeared. Her cryptic warning echoed in his mind, reinforcing the sense of unseen danger he felt closing in around Seraphina. Finally, after nearly a week of relentless travel, he reached the edge of the great forest. He stood on a high, wind-swept ridge, and before him, sprawling across the valley floor, was the city of Silvermoon. It was a fortress of white and silver, larger and more intimidating than any story had described. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Thousands of werewolves lived there, all part of a complex and brutal hierarchy that had no place for him. He was one small, homeless Omega, standing at the gates of a world of immense power, with no plan and no allies. All he had was a desperate hope to see a princess with emerald eyes one more time. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Finn took a deep breath and started down the ridge. His journey was over, but his true test was just beginning. Chapter 11. The Underbelly of Silvermoon. Entering Silvermoon was like stepping into another world. The air, thick with the smoke of 1,000 hearths and the press of too many bodies, was a stark contrast to the clean, wild scent of the forest. Here, power had a clear geography. The citadel sat on a high hill, its white towers pristine and untouched, while the city cascaded down around it, growing grittier and more desperate with every step Finn took away from the center. He kept his head down, his worn leather tunic and gaunt features marking him as an outsider, drawing suspicious glances from merchants and scornful looks from the uniformed city guards. He instinctively sought the shadows, the narrow, winding alleys of the lower district known as the Warrens. This was the city's forgotten underbelly, a place of cracked cobblestones, leaning tenements, and the pervasive smell of poverty and despair. It was here that the lowest members of the pack hierarchy, the Omegas, the elderly, the outcasts, eked out a living. For the first time since leaving the Blackwood, Finn was surrounded by his own kind, yet the sense of community he had unconsciously hoped for was absent. Here, survival had bred suspicion. Every Omega he saw had a haunted, guarded look in their eyes. He found temporary shelter in the ruins of a collapsed building, a place no one else wanted. For 2 days, he scavenged for scraps, his hunger a constant, gnawing ache. He was losing hope. The citadel was an impenetrable fortress, and he was nothing but a ghost haunting its lowest depths. How could he ever hope to reach Serafina, to even catch a glimpse of her? On the 3rd day, driven by desperation, he followed the scent of roasting meat to a dingy tavern called the Bent Coin. The air inside was thick with smoke and cheap ale. He was about to turn away when a scuffle broke out. A burly beta merchant was berating an elderly Omega who had spilled his drink, shoving the frail man against a wall. "You clumsy oaf. You'll pay for my tunic," the beta roared. No one moved to help. The other patrons simply looked away, unwilling to draw the beta's ire. The same protective instinct that had driven Finn to save Serafina surged through him. Before he could think, he stepped forward. "It was an accident," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Leave him be." The beta turned, his face purpling with rage. "And who are you to tell me what to do, stray?" He raised a meaty fist. Finn stood his ground, bracing for the blow. But it never came. A hand shot out and clamped around the beta's wrist, stopping it mid-air. The hand belonged to a tall, wiry Omega with sharp, intelligent gray eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from weathered stone. He was older than Finn, with flecks of silver in his dark cropped hair, and he moved with a quiet confidence that was rare for their kind. "He's not worth the trouble, friend," the older Omega said to the beta, his voice deceptively mild, but his grip was like iron. "Let the old man go, and I'll buy your next 2 rounds." The beta, surprised by the Omega's strength and seeing the logic in the offer, grumbled and released the old man. The wiry Omega tossed a few coins on the bar and then guided Finn out of the tavern and into the relative quiet of an alley. "That was either very brave or very stupid," the Omega said, his gray eyes appraising Finn. "In the Warrens, they're usually the same thing. You're new here. You carry the scent of the deep woods." "I am," Finn admitted. "My name is Finn." "Elias," the man replied. "You shouldn't make a habit of playing the hero. It's a quick way to get yourself killed." "I couldn't just stand there," Finn said. Elias studied him for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Perhaps respect, perhaps pity. "You have a fire in you. Most Omegas who end up here have had that beaten out of them long ago. What brings a forest wolf like you to this cage?" Finn hesitated, the old Omega's warning to be careful who he trusted echoing in his mind. But looking at Elias, at his steady gaze and the weary kindness etched around his eyes, he felt a flicker of trust. He had no allies, no hope. Perhaps this was a start. "I'm looking for someone," Finn said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone in the citadel." Elias let out a short, humorless laugh. "The citadel? You might as well be looking for the moon. You and we're ground dwellers, friend. The sky is for the alphas." Chapter 12, A Message in the Wind. While Finn struggled in the Warrens, Serafina paced the silken carpets of her chambers like a caged lioness. Every day, the wedding drew closer, a guillotine poised over the last of her freedom. Her attempts to speak to her father were rebuffed. He saw her warnings about Valerius as childish fantasies, a desperate attempt to delay her duty. She was utterly isolated, but she was not without resources. Her greatest asset was Elara, her personal handmaiden since childhood. Elara was a small, quiet beta with mousy brown hair and wide, fearful eyes, but beneath her timid exterior was a core of fierce, unwavering loyalty. She was the one person within the citadel's walls whom Serafina trusted implicitly. One evening, as Elara was brushing out Serafina's long raven hair, the princess made her move. "Elara," she began, her voice low and urgent, "I need you to do something for me. It's dangerous, and if you are caught, the consequences will be severe." Elara's hands stilled. "For you, my lady, I would do anything." Serafina's heart swelled with gratitude. She quickly explained the situation, not the political intrigue, but the more personal danger. The Omega who saved me in the forest. His name is Finn. I fear the rogues who attacked me may seek him out for revenge. I must warn him. I need you to take a message to the woods. She retrieved a small, sealed parchment from a hidden drawer in her writing desk. The message inside was simple, yet coded with a meaning only Finn would understand. To the Silver Ghost, the waterfall is no longer safe. The hunters you angered have long memories. Seek the old she-wolf by the stream. She is a friend to the moon's children. I am in a gilded cage, but the fire you saw has not gone out. Be safe. The girl with the wildflower crown. It was a risk. If Kale or Valerius intercepted it, they would see it as proof of her continued defiance, but it was a risk she had to take. Take this to the Blackwood, Seraphina instructed, pressing the parchment and a small pouch of gold into Elara's hand. Go to the area where the royal guard found me. Leave this hidden near the waterfall where he made his shelter. He may go back there. If you cannot find it, just leave it somewhere safe where he might see it. Elara's face was pale, but she nodded, tucking the message into her bodice. I will not fail you, my lady. The next morning, Elara claimed a family emergency in her village, a common enough request that it was granted without much suspicion. She slipped out of the citadel, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and determination. The journey was fraught with peril for a lone beta female, but the thought of the princess's haunted eyes, and the memory of the genuine happiness she had briefly seen in her after her rescue, gave her strength. She was not just a messenger, she was a lifeline, a single thread of hope connecting a princess in a tower to a homeless Omega in the wild. She prayed to the ancient moon goddess that it would be enough. Chapter 13, A Glimmer of Hope. Under Elias's reluctant tutelage, Finn began to learn the rhythms of the Warrens. He learned which merchants would trade for snared pigeons, how to stay out of the way of the drunken city guards, and where to find the cleanest water. Elias, for all his cynicism, had taken a grudging liking to the forest Omega. He saw in Finn a reflection of a younger, more hopeful version of himself, a spirit he thought had been extinguished long ago. The citadel, Elias mused one evening as they shared a meager meal of stale bread and cheese. You still have your heart set on that fool's errand? I have to know if she's all right, Finn insisted. Elias sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. The only way to get news from the castle is to listen to the castle's trash. He gestured with his head. The servants. They come to the lower market for goods their masters won't pay for. Spices, fabrics, gossip. It's all for sale, if you know who to ask. The next day, Elias led Finn to a bustling market square that sat on the border between the lower city and the more affluent districts. The air was a cacophony of sounds and smells. Here, the servants of the great houses, identifiable by their plain but well-kept liveries, mingled with the common folk. Finn scanned the crowd, his heart a nervous drum. He felt impossibly conspicuous, a wild thing in a civilized pen. He was about to give up when a familiar scent cut through the noise. It was faint, but unmistakable. It was the scent of Seraphina's chambers, of her soap, her perfume, her very presence. He followed the scent with a desperate intensity, his eyes landing on a small, brown-haired woman in a simple grey dress who was nervously purchasing a roll of bandages from a stall. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around as if she expected to be caught at any moment. Finn recognized the scent as coming from her, a proxy for Seraphina herself. This had to be a sign. Elias saw the look on his face and put a restraining hand on his arm. Easy, forest wolf. You charge in there and you'll spook her. But Finn couldn't wait. He moved forward, slowly, trying not to be intimidating. Excuse me, he said, his voice soft. The woman, Elara, jumped, her eyes wide with fright as she took in his wild appearance. Please, Finn said, his amber eyes pleading. I mean you no harm. I am a friend of the girl with the wildflower crown. Elara gasped, her hand flying to the parchment hidden in her dress. Her eyes darted from Finn's face to the shadows of the alleyways, searching for guards or spies. She had failed. She was meant to go to the forest, but fear had kept her close to the city, and now the very person she was meant to warn had found her. You are Finn? She whispered, her voice trembling. He nodded, a profound relief washing over him. She is well. She is a prisoner, Elara said urgently, pressing the parchment into his hand. The court is full of snakes. She is not safe. She sent me to warn you. She said you would not be safe either. Before Finn could ask another question, a shadow fell over them. 2 city guards, their expressions bored and contemptuous, were approaching their stall. Elara's face went white with panic. I must go, she hissed, before turning and melting back into the crowd, disappearing before the guards reached them. Finn clutched the parchment, his hand trembling. He retreated into the alley with Elias, his heart pounding. She had sent a message. She was thinking of him. She was trying to protect him. In the midst of his despair, it was a staggering, brilliant glimmer of hope. But it was hope laced with a new and terrible fear. She was in danger. Chapter 14, The Traitor's Web. Elara's journey back to the citadel was a nightmare of fear. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every passing glance felt like an accusation. She had been reckless, speaking to the Omega in the open market. She prayed her indiscretion had gone unnoticed. She was wrong. Lord Valerius had eyes and ears everywhere. His network of spies was woven into the very fabric of the city, from the highest echelons of the court to the lowliest beggars in the warrens. A whisper from a market vendor about a castle servant speaking furtively with a wild-looking Omega was all it took. By the time Elara passed through the servants' gate of the citadel, Valerius knew. He intercepted her in a quiet, secluded corridor, stepping out from behind a tapestry so silently she cried out in shock. Valerius was a handsome, silver-haired alpha whose charm was as polished as his armor, but whose eyes held the cold, predatory stillness of a patient wolf. Mistress Elara, he said, his voice a smooth, silken purr that did nothing to hide the menace beneath. Returning from your family emergency? I do hope everything is well. Elara's blood ran cold. My lord, she stammered, curtsying low. Yes, my mother is. She is much better, thank you. Good, good, Valerius said, circling her slowly. It is so important to have loyal family. Just as it is important for a princess to have loyal servants. He stopped directly in front of her, his proximity suffocating. Tell me, did you happen to enjoy the market today? I hear the lower market is so vibrant. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. He knew. I do not know what you mean, my lord. Don't you? His smile was a razor's edge. Let me be clear. I know about your little errand for the princess. I know about the message. And I know about the Omega. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Your loyalty to the princess is admirable, but misplaced. You are a pawn in a game you cannot comprehend. But you can still be a useful one. He straightened up, brushing a piece of lint from his velvet tunic. You will tell the princess that you could not find her forest friend. You will tell her the woods were empty, that he is likely long gone. You will continue to be her loyal, devoted servant. And you will report everything she says and does to me. If you do this, your family in their small village will remain safe and healthy. If you refuse, or if you breathe a word of this conversation to anyone, his smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, chilling malice. I will personally burn their village to the ground while you watch. Do you understand me? Tears streamed down Elara's face as she gave a single, jerky nod. He had her trapped. She was now a spy, a traitor to the one person she held most dear. Valerius gave her a last, satisfied smile and walked away, leaving her trembling and broken in the empty corridor, a captive in his treacherous web. Chapter 15, An Unlikely Alliance. Back in the ruins that served as his shelter, Finn read Seraphina's message over and over, his fingers tracing the elegant script. Each word was a precious gift, a confirmation that the connection he felt was real. But the warning was dire. The waterfall is no longer safe. The hunters you angered have long memories. She was worried about him, even from within her gilded cage. Elias watched him, his expression grim. So, the princess in the tower has a soft spot for a stray. It's a sweet story. It will get you both killed. She's in danger, Elias, Finn said, looking up from the parchment, his amber eyes burning with intensity. Her maid said the court is full of snakes. This is more than just a forced marriage. Something is wrong. Something is always wrong in the halls of power, Elias countered, his cynicism a well-worn shield. The alphas play their games, and we try not to get crushed beneath their feet. That is the way of the world. It doesn't have to be, Finn said, a new strength in his voice that surprised them both. Serafina is not like them. She's kind, and she's strong. She fought against 3 rogues with a broken branch. She's fighting them now, from inside that castle. But she's alone. I can't leave her. And what can you do? Elias scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual bite. You're one Omega. I'm another. We have no power, no weapons, no allies. We have this, Finn said, tapping his temple. I survived in the Blackwood for 5 years because I learned to be invisible, to watch and to listen. You have survived in the Warrens. You know this city, you know its secrets, its hidden paths. We aren't alphas. We can't fight them with brute force. So we have to be smarter than them. He looked at Elias, his plea laid bare. I know I am asking the impossible. You owe me nothing. But I can't do this alone. Help me, Elias. Help me find a way to help her. Elias was silent for a long time, staring into the small, flickering flame of their meager fire. He had spent years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that caring was a weakness, that hope was a fool's luxury. But this quiet, determined Omega from the forest had chipped away at those walls. He saw the fire in Finn's eyes, the same fire he had once had, and he found, to his own astonishment, that he wanted to see it burn brighter, not be extinguished. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath. This is insane, he muttered, shaking his head. We will likely end up hanging from the citadel walls. He looked up, and for the first time, a genuine, wry smile touched his lips. But I must admit, it has been a very long time since I have done anything truly interesting. He met Finn's hopeful gaze. All right, Forest Wolf, Elias said, his voice resolute. You have your ally. Now, let's figure out how 2 nobodies in the gutter can start a war with the snakes in the sky. Chapter 16. The Whispers of the Walls. Finn stared at the parchment, Serafina's elegant script a stark contrast to the grime of their surroundings. Hope was a dangerous, flickering candle flame in the dark, but it was all he had. Elias, seeing the unwavering resolve in his new friend's eyes, let his cynicism fall away, replaced by a grim pragmatism. If the court is full of snakes, we can't fight them in the open, Elias said, his voice low. We need to learn their language. We need to listen to the walls. Elias's years in the Warrens had not been spent idly. He was a survivor, and survival meant knowing things. He knew which guards were gamblers, which merchants were cheats, and most importantly, which castle servants felt underpaid and overlooked. These were the invisible people, the ones who polished the armor, served the wine, and emptied the chamber pots. They saw everything and were seen by no one. They were Elias's way in. He led Finn through a labyrinth of back alleys to a laundromat, the air thick with the smell of lye soap and steam. There, they met Martha, a stout Omega woman with work-roughened hands and eyes that missed nothing. She was Elias's oldest contact, a senior laundress in the citadel whose loyalty was to her people in the Warrens, not the alphas on the hill. Valerius, she hissed after Elias explained their purpose, her voice barely audible over the bubbling of a copper pot. He's the serpent in the garden. He's been meeting with men who don't have the castle's scent on them. Rogues, I'd wager. They come and go through the old aqueduct tunnels under the West Wing. He promises them power, land. Anything to secure their loyalty. This was it. The first solid piece of evidence. Why would he do that? Finn asked, his mind racing. He despises Lord Kale, Martha explained, wringing out a heavy sheet. The marriage between the princess and the captain solidifies a power base that Valerius can't break. But if the marriage were to fail, if, say, the captain were to be implicated in some great crime, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the steamy air. Elias's sharp mind connected the dots. He's not just trying to stop a wedding. He's planning a coup. He uses the rogues to create chaos, frames Kale for it, and presents himself to the king as the only one who can restore order. The sheer scale of the treachery was staggering. They weren't just trying to save a princess from an unhappy marriage, they were trying to save the entire kingdom from a civil war. "There's a grand rehearsal dinner in 2 nights, Martha added, her expression grave. "For the wedding. The entire court will be there. The king, the captain, everyone. If Valerius plans to make a move, that's when it will happen. Security will be focused on the main hall, not on the shadows." Finn's heart pounded. 2 days. That's all they had. He looked at Elias, a silent understanding passing between them. Their impossible mission had just found a deadline. They had to find a way to expose Valerius, to bring his treason into the light before he could plunge the kingdom into darkness. Their only weapon was the truth, and their only way in was through the forgotten tunnels and secret passages of the very castle that sought to keep them out. Chapter 17. The Serpent's Gambit. Inside the citadel, Serafina felt the walls closing in. Ilara had returned from her errand, with a face full of carefully constructed pity. "I am so sorry, my lady," she'd whispered, her eyes downcast. "I went to the waterfall, to the woods. There was no sign of him. The cave was empty. He's gone." The news, though a lie, struck Serafina with the force of a physical blow. A part of her had held onto the hope that Finn was out there, that somehow they would meet again. Now, that hope was extinguished. She was truly, utterly alone. The lie served Valerius's purpose perfectly, plunging the princess into a state of despair that made her less likely to fight, less likely to notice the final pieces of his plan clicking into place. But Valerius had underestimated her. Grief did not make Serafina passive, it honed her senses, sharpening her anger into a diamond-hard point of focus. She knew a traitor was in their midst, and she watched Valerius with a hawk's intensity. She noticed the way his personal guards were now stationed near the royal kitchens, the subtle deference the head steward showed him. He was consolidating his power in the service areas, the arteries of the castle. The night before the rehearsal dinner, her suspicions were confirmed. Unable to sleep, she wandered onto her balcony, the cool night air a balm on her troubled mind. It was then she saw it, a cloaked figure slipping out of a side entrance to the kitchens and meeting another in the shadows of the garden. It was Lord Valerius's chief steward meeting with a man whose scent was rank with the wildness of a rogue. She was too far away to hear their words, but she saw the glint of a small, dark vial passing between them before the rogue melted back into the night. Poison. The realization was a shard of ice in her gut. He wasn't going to frame Kale with whispers and rumors. He was going to commit the ultimate act of treason and lay the blame at his rival's feet. He would poison her father, the king, and in the ensuing chaos, he would produce some fabricated evidence pointing to Kale, the impatient fiancé eager to claim the throne. Kale would be executed, the marriage alliance would be shattered, and Valerius, the ever-loyal advisor, would be there to save the kingdom. She backed away from the balcony, her body trembling not with fear, but with a terrifying cold fury. She had no one to turn to. Ilara was compromised, her father wouldn't believe her, and Kale would see it as a ploy. She had no proof, only a glimpse in the dark. She would be in that hall tomorrow night, forced to watch her father die, powerless to stop it. As she stood in the opulent darkness of her room, she clutched the silken sheets, her knuckles white. She was not powerless. She was a princess of the Lycan line, and she would not let her father, her kingdom, and the memory of the kind Omega who saved her be destroyed. She would find a way. Chapter 18. A Desperate Message. Finn and Elias spent the next day in a fever of planning. Martha, their eyes and ears in the castle, confirmed that Valerius had taken a personal interest in the wine selection for the king's table at the rehearsal dinner. The serpent's plan was clear. Now, they faced the impossible task of proving it. A rogue's word against a lord of the court is nothing, Elias reasoned, pacing their ruined shelter. We need more. We need to catch the snake with the venom in his hand. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Serafina was fighting her own desperate battle. She knew Ilara was Valerius's spy, and her heart ached for the terrified girl, but she could use it. She began to speak loudly of her resignation to the marriage, of her plans to be a dutiful wife to Kale. She let Ilara overhear her saying she wished the wedding were even sooner. It was a performance designed to make Valerius believe she was no longer a threat, to lull him into a false sense of security. But she needed to get a message out, a final desperate cry for help into the void. She couldn't use Elara. Instead, she turned to an old, grizzled guard named Gregor, a man who had been on her personal detail since she was a child and had once taken a whipping for her when she'd let a prize falcon escape. His loyalty was to her, not the court. "Gregor," she said, finding him in a quiet corridor. "I need you to deliver something. Not as a princess, but as the little girl who you used to sneak candied apples to. My life, and the life of my father, depends on it." Seeing the raw desperation in her eyes, the old wolf nodded without hesitation. She pressed a heavy, signet-stamped scroll into his hand. It wasn't a letter. It was an official decree, pulled from her father's study, one that ordered a full lockdown of the aqueduct tunnels for a security inspection. It was a huge risk, but it was all she could think of. "Take this to the Warrens," she instructed. "Give it to an Omega with grey eyes named Elias. They call him a leader there. Tell him the serpent plans to strike the king tonight. Tell him this is the only key I can give him." Gregor, his face grim, concealed the scroll and departed. He delivered the message, finding Elias through the Warrens' whisper network just as the sun was beginning to set. Elias and Finn read the decree. It wasn't a plea, it was a weapon. "She's brilliant," Elias breathed, a look of profound respect on his face. "She's using her authority to trap him. Valerius's rogues use those tunnels as an escape route. She's just locked them in the cellar with him." Finn's heart swelled with a fierce pride. When he realizes his escape is cut off, he'll panic. And panicked men make mistakes. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of blood orange and violet. The rehearsal dinner was about to begin. It was time. Elias looked at Finn, his expression deadly serious. "There's no coming back from this. If we fail, we die." "She is fighting for us," Finn replied, his voice steady. "It's time we fought for her." Chapter 19, The Night of the Serpent's Fall. The Great Hall of Silvermoon was a dazzling spectacle of power and wealth. Banners depicting the history of the Lycan Kings hung from the high rafters, and the air was rich with the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine. King Alistair sat at the head table, flanked by a radiant, if tense, Seraphina and a proud, imposing Kale. Lord Valerius stood behind the king's chair, the picture of a loyal advisor, his charming smile a mask for the poison in his heart. As the first course was served, Finn and Elias were moving through the damp, moss-covered darkness of the aqueduct tunnels. Gregor had shown them the way. Armed with only a small knife and the element of surprise, they found what they were looking for, two of Valerius's rogue agents, waiting for the signal to flee after the deed was done. The fight was short, brutal, and silent. Finn, using the speed and agility honed by the forest, and Elias, with the vicious cunning of the Warrens, subdued the rogues, binding and gagging them in the darkness. They were the proof. In the hall, the royal steward, a man loyal to Valerius, approached the head table with a decanter of deep red wine, reserved for the king. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. As the steward began to pour, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "A toast," she declared, her voice ringing with a false brightness that caught everyone's attention. "To my impending union. To Lord Kale." She grabbed her own goblet and, in a feigned movement of ecstatic clumsiness, stumbled, knocking the king's freshly poured goblet from the table. It shattered on the floor, the dark poisoned wine seeping into the ancient stone like blood. A collective gasp went through the hall. King Alistair looked at her, his face a mixture of shock and anger. Kale was stunned. But Valerius's face, for a split second, flashed with pure, murderous rage before his mask of calm slipped back into place. He had seen his plan ruined. "Your Highness," he began, his voice oozing false concern. "Perhaps you are unwell." "I am perfectly well, Lord Valerius," Seraphina said, her voice dropping, now cold and sharp as ice. "But I do wonder about the loyalty of your staff." It was the signal. From a servant's entrance behind the main dais, the doors burst open. But it was not servants who emerged. It was Elias and Finn, dragging their two bound and gagged rogue captives into the light. Panic erupted. The royal guard, including Kale, drew their swords, moving to protect the king. "Treason!" Valerius bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Finn. "The Omega stray who conspired with the princess. Seize them. These men work for you, Valerius." Elias shouted, tearing the gag from one of the rogues. Tell them who paid you to smuggle poison into the royal kitchen." The rogue, seeing the dozens of swords pointed his way, broke instantly, his words tumbling out in a terrified confession of Valerius's entire plot. Valerius, exposed and trapped, let out a roar of pure fury. His human form melted away, and in its place was a massive, silver-furred wolf, his eyes burning with hate. He lunged not at the guards, but at the king himself, a last desperate act of vengeance. But Cale, his face a mask of cold fury at the betrayal, was faster. He shifted, his own powerful alpha form meeting Valerius mid-air. The two wolves crashed into the stone floor in a whirlwind of claws and teeth. While the alphas fought, Finn moved not towards the battle, but to Seraphina's side, placing himself between her and the chaos, a silent, unwavering protector. Their eyes met over the din, and in that single look, a world of fear, relief, and love was exchanged. The battle was short. Cale, fighting for his king and his honor, was the superior warrior. He pinned a wounded and defeated Valerius to the floor, his jaws around the traitor's throat, waiting for the king's command. The hall was silent, save for the ragged panting of the wolves. King Alistair rose, his eyes moving from the defeated Valerius, to a stunned but vindicated Cale, and finally to his daughter, and the homeless Omega who stood steadfastly by her side. The reign of the serpent was over. Chapter 20. The Dawn of a New Pack. In the quiet aftermath, the truth settled over the kingdom like the morning sun. Valerius and his conspirators were imprisoned, their web of deceit dismantled. The great hall, the scene of the violent climax, was cleaned and set right, but nothing would ever be the same. King Alistair summoned Seraphina and Finn to the throne room the following day. Cale and Elias were also present, standing as witnesses. The king looked older, the lines on his face carved deeper by betrayal and revelation. He looked at Finn, not with contempt, but with a new grudging respect. "You are an Omega," the king stated, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Homeless. An outcast. Yet you have shown more loyalty, courage, and intelligence than a high-born lord who advised me for 20 years. You saved my life. You saved my daughter. You saved this kingdom." He then turned to Cale. "Lord Cale, you fought with honor. Your name is cleared of all suspicion." Cale inclined his head. "Thank you, your majesty." He then looked at Seraphina, his silver eyes holding no malice, only a weary acceptance. "The marriage alliance between our bloodlines is no longer necessary to secure the peace. And it is clear the princess's heart lies elsewhere." It was a gesture of immense grace, an honorable retreat that preserved his dignity. The engagement was broken. Finally, the king's gaze fell upon his daughter. "Seraphina, I saw you as a child. I was wrong. You are a queen. Your heart is your own. Choose your path." Seraphina's eyes filled with tears of relief. She walked across the marble floor and took Finn's hand, her fingers lacing with his without hesitation. "This is my path," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This is my pack." Finn looked at their joined hands, then at her radiant face, and the last of the shadows that had clung to his heart for so long finally vanished. He was not a stray, not a nothing. He was him, and that was enough. Their union was not a traditional one, but it heralded a new era for Silvermoon. Finn, with Elias at his side, became a voice for the forgotten people of the kingdom. He was appointed as a new royal advisor, his gentle wisdom and first-hand knowledge of the common folk's struggles bringing a balance the court had lacked for centuries. He never sought power, only to nurture and protect his new larger pack, the truest calling of an Omega. Seraphina, finally free, ruled alongside him, not as a distant princess, but as a leader who had walked in the wild and knew the value of every single member of her pack, from the highest alpha to the humblest Omega. One evening, months later, they stood on the balcony of her chambers, the same one from which she had witnessed Valerius's treachery. The lights of the city glittered below. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The forest? The cave behind the waterfall?" Finn turned to her, his amber eyes full of a love so deep it left her breathless. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. The cave was a shelter, he whispered, his lips brushing against her hair. But it was never home. He looked into her emerald eyes. Home is right here. I was homeless until I found you.